This guy gets it. He knows that like, this is just a job, right? Like we are all people, and that he's willing to go first, kind of cry and tell us about his personal life. That's how I try to, lead with authenticity and like invite people to be authentic too, because I'm willing to do it.
Welcome back to the Thoughts on Selling podcast. Today, it is my delight and pleasure to have Jeff Kirchick on. Right, David? No, Jeff. Wait, yeah. Who's on today?
Glad we sorted that out just a moment ago, but thank you for having me.
All the behind the scenes activities just to get to where we can hit the record button. So who is Jeff Kirchick?
Sure. I think I am someone who is constantly changing. If you were to ask me this question a few years ago and what I want and why I do what I do, the answer is different than it is today. Since the birth of my daughter, I would say, which was a couple of years ago. But like anyone else, I'm a constantly changing person, always trying to get better, someone who values empathy and trying to help other people and trying to help other people realize their potential. That's who I am. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Helping others realize their potential. So here's a question for you, Jeff. You wrote a book a few years ago. I'm going to leave alone what caused you to write a book. Maybe that's a reasonable question. So what drove you to write a book?
Sure. So I, in college, I majored in English and creative writing. I wrote a creative thesis. All my friends kind of made fun of me that, I wasn't going to find a job after school and whatever. But, long story short is I love writing and I always wanted to apply it to my career. Like I fell into sales. I told myself if I make a lot of money, maybe I'll be a screenwriter someday and I'll be able to afford that lifestyle. And so when the pandemic hit, I finally had the time to do it. And the pandemic was a weird time because people were kind of at each other's throats politically, especially. And I remember thinking to myself, watching my friends like yell at each other on Facebook about different things, that this was not productive. And that if people had more of like a sales mindset in terms of how they interacted with others, that they might get along better, and that learning some basic principles of sales might be good for people. So that was a motivation. And I think I also just foresaw that this AI stuff was going to become big. This was 5 years ago. So people feel like it's obvious now, but 5 years ago, it wasn't as obvious. And I was somebody who always leaned into being an honest version of myself, and it worked well for me in my sales career. And so I saw a potential problem in being overly formulaic because it could become commoditized by AI. And so I wanted to write about that and talk about that.
Yeah, that's very cool. And so you set out to write a book about AI and you ended up taking a deep dive into authenticity?
I would say actually the other way around. I think I cared about authenticity because I've been working in startups for most of my career, and the company that I was at for a long time where I'd led sales was about to be acquired, and I had had some personal success in selling, 6 and 7 figure contracts to some of the largest, Fortune 500 brands in the United States, but without too much sales training and too much process. I was a relationship builder, and I felt that there was something to that I wanted to share with others, that like you can win by leaning into being an honest version of who you are. And like Todd Capone has written a book called Transparency Sale, which is somewhat similar, but not the exact same. I set out to write about authenticity, but then I also knew that AI was around the corner. And so I thought to myself, well, actually, I think what I'm writing about is more important than ever, because there's going to be this whole wave of stuff that's going to make it feel more important than it was even at that time. So yeah, probably the other way around, but yeah.
Okay. So what'd you learn? What did you learn through the process of writing the book? And what was your initial thesis? What'd you study? What'd you take the deep dive into? And what'd you come out with?
So first and foremost, the hardest part about writing the book, I think is true of other people that have written books that I've spoken with. They'll say that editing is the hardest part. You'll come out with a draft and then you'll send it to your friends and family or whoever else is going to read it. And they all have 1,000 comments. And then it's really hard to distill what you want to listen to and what you don't want to listen to, but you want to be objective about it because you don't want to be too married to your own ideas. You can't have too much conviction in your own ideas. You need to be open-minded about what other people are telling you. And so I think being balanced about that is challenging. But the other answer might surprise you, Lee. The other answer is that I think I leaned too hard into my thesis because since writing the book, I do believe that I think I downplayed the importance of structure and process and sales and the science of sales. And I would say that the science is very important as well. I think when I wrote the book, I was a little more naive about that. And so I think it's important for people to be open to changing their mind or, willing to adapt their ideas with time. And it's not to say that I completely dismiss the science in the book, but I do think I was more dismissive of it at the time that I wrote it than I would be today.
Yeah, it's a pendulum swing that goes back and forth, that you get people in sales operations or revenue operations now that say, we need to measure every movement. We need to measure every action. We need to measure every response. And in transactional selling, to some extent, you can do that. In enterprise selling, particularly longer term, larger project, longer engagement, most of what you do is the art of the relationship building, the relationship bank account deposits, and the choreography of your resources and your customers' resources. And at the same time, there are processes, right? We used to believe that buyers had a process, but they might, but they don't follow the same order every time.
Right.
So these days, I'm with you that there has to be some science, there has to be some art, and good salespeople are great listeners.
Yep.
And by the way, if we follow Matt Dixon and Ted McKenna in the Jolt effect, salespeople have to fairly narrowly limit what their customers do, right? L stands for limit, because if I'm buying an ERP system for the first time, I don't know how to do it. I have some idea of what my goal state is.
Right. Well, I think what you're saying, and if you go back to what you said a moment ago too, with like the buyer not having a same process every time, it makes me feel like you can have process, but process doesn't always need to be linear. And I think that that's like hard for some people to accept, because when you think of process, you think of order, you think of there's an order of events, and there can be like moments that matter in a process, but you need to be willing to go back in order to take two steps forward, I think, right? Like, I remember this deal that I had closed, but it didn't really go anywhere. I remember a deal I closed a couple of years ago with a bank where they were like, hey, we want to do this pilot with this group. And I got happy ears and I said, let's do it. This group that we piloted with was really not a good group to pilot with, because they were, for a number of reasons. And like, what I should have done was be more disciplined about, it's wonderful that you want to pilot, but we need to do the right level of discovery to understand what the right group is. And I don't think this group is the right group. And here are the reasons why. And so you can still have a process that gets you to the outcome. But sometimes, I think when you tell a seller like, hey, you do this thing, then that thing, then the other thing, then they don't do that. They don't listen. They just they get the happy ears. They just move to the next step. They get to fill out their CRM. They feel like they're doing a good job. And so I think there's this idea of linearity in process is sometimes, to your point, it's right. Like it can change, right?
Right. I think about it from another perspective, that most of my coaching clients are working on fairly large enterprise deals. And I had one working on a fairly good sized deal with a large company, a first in that organization. And I said, do you have a CSA with this account? And she said, no. I said, you need one, because when they sign yes, their MSA doesn't cover cloud. And if you don't have that in place, you're not going anywhere. And then I had a similar conversation with another coaching client in a smaller organization where he was coming up on a time limit where a customer needed to get this thing implemented and soon, but they didn't have an MSA in place. And I said, you should get that started. And the response of the customer was, we don't know what you're selling us. We don't have pricing yet. Why should we put any effort into a contract? It's like, well, it should have been some budgetary guidelines presented first, but he got it a little too far out of sequence. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That's how the song goes, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I love that example, because people would associate MSA as the last step in a process. But in theory, if you know that that's going to be a roadblock to getting something done within the right amount of time, then maybe it should be initiated sooner, even if you're not going to go forward, right? And so I love that example. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, this was a company that is in the physical goods business, and relatively all of their focus is on those physical goods, acquiring them, storing them, selling them. And to spend an hour on an MSA where it's not clear that that was going to lead them anywhere, not happening.
Yep.
Whereas in a much larger company, sure, we'll throw some lawyers at it. But this company didn't have the bandwidth to do something on spec.
Yep. Makes sense. Yeah.
We have to read our customers and understand, like, sometimes we can't hurry them.
Yeah. No, it makes sense.
So let's talk about AI. Many, many years ago, before commercial AI could pick up the phone and have a conversation with a buyer, which you can do today, I had conversations with people about, do we need salespeople anymore? Can we automate the selling and buying process? And the answer is sure. Will it work? No. Customers don't want that. Now, fast forward to today. We can have AI agents calling on buyers, and buyers could potentially have AI agents answering the inquiry. or answering the call. Do we want that?
It depends, I think.
Tell me more.
Well, so if you think about it, this has actually been kind of going on for a long time. People just aren't really aware of it. Like, when you call into a call center, the first thing that happens is you hit what's called the IVR, the interactive voice response tool. And that, whether or not you want to call it AI, we can call it some lowbrow version of AI or low grade version of AI, let's say.
Originally, it was a tree, and then it was rule-based, and now it's a little bit smarter. And it might be looking up your demographics or psychographics or your account history. So it's got some intelligence about you.
Yeah, exactly, right? But long story short is, it was the same idea. They were trying to automate away you needing to go talk to a person because that's more expensive. And in the call center world, 99% of call centers care about trying to make, I was in the space for a while. They're trying to cut costs as much as they can.
They count every second.
Well, yeah. And look, like a lot of people, you'd be surprised about the percentage of people who do self-service within an IVR or buy products within an IVR without talking to a human. And I'm not saying that it can happen, in every organization, but certainly at the bottom of the market, like we already see product-led growth as a model that works within the SaaS ecosystem. Like there are certainly people that are willing to go and spend money without talking to a person. There are people that will go and buy a trial and then it converts to paid. So conceptually, I think we've already demonstrated that you can do it. Now, can you do it to sell multi-million-dollar contracts to banks and other organizations or in a highly competitive market like the one I'm in where I've got 50 competitors? Could AI outsell, my competitors? Absolutely not. I don't think that's going to happen. In fact, I don't think it will ever happen. And there's a lot of reasons we can get into for that, but I'd love to hear your take. Where do you agree or disagree with what I just said?
So I think for purely commoditized offerings, self-service is a reasonable approach. If I'm buying my 200th HPE server, I don't need to talk to an HPE rep. What's the price for 8 terabytes of storage and X number of memory and delivery on Thursday? I don't care, right? And if it saves me $50 to not have to talk to someone, great. And if I can do it at 3:00 in the morning in my pajamas, even better. But if I'm looking to change how I run some portion of my business, I want to talk to someone who can say, here are the challenges you're going to face. Here are the perils. Here are the pitfalls. Here's the change management you're going to have to undertake so that your organization, not an organization, but your organization is successful with this acquisition.
Yep.
Could we train ChatGPT to tell us all that? Sure.
The problem is that AI can be modeled and trained however you want. So at a certain point, AI actually doesn't become trustworthy. Like, let's just imagine hypothetically that there's a world where AI has looked at every sale you've ever done, and it can actually speak as objectively as possible to that customer about the change management in their organization, what's going to make them successful and what's not. There's still this whole other issue of ethics, which is something people don't talk about, by the way. No one talks about ethics. No, everyone assumes that the AI is just going to be trained to be accurate. That it's not going to have a slant or a spin, but AI can have a spin. AI can be salesy, right? So at a certain point, while it would be nice or would be kind of cool if AI could just do all this, maybe not for people in my role because we wouldn't have jobs, there are people that are responsible for training the AI. Like you still have the fundamental question of trust behind what you're being told. And so to me, that's why it can't replace larger value transactions. It's not about whether it can or can't, like from a capabilities perspective. I'm sure, there's already tools that can look at all of your calls and tell you what to do to optimize your chances of winning deals. Like it's already smart enough to do a lot of things that are directionally putting it on track to just do it for you. But there's still an issue of ethics, and there's going to become an issue of trust behind what does my AI versus my competitor's AI say to somebody, right?
So I'll never forget the smile test. When I was a sales engineer calling on resellers with my sales guy, the partner would ask my sales guy a question, and they would look at me to see if I was smiling or frowning. Is Dave telling the truth?
Right.
Right? My old friend Dave Harvey. Is Dave telling the truth? How's Lee responding? Guess what? That hasn't changed. I see that today. A rep says something and they look at the sales engineer. I'll never forget, I used to go on calls with a woman at Oracle who would say, when I used to run data warehouses, people would lean in. Really? You actually have hands-on experience? They were really interested in her perspective. So when we think about what drives buyers today of complex systems, it's mostly about risk perception, risk management, risk mitigation. I don't get that from a chatbot going, there, everything will be fine.
Correct. And I think to your earlier point about risk management, risk perception, all that stuff, and this comes back to, I guess, the themes of my book, but I wrote it for a reason. I believe in it. I think that when people believe you are presenting an honest version of yourself, they are more likely to believe that you're telling the truth. And so I've given examples of people who are authentic. And by the way, they're controversial whenever I give these presentations because these are not necessarily like likable people. To give you an example, like one of them is Dennis Rodman. And like there's a million reasons why like Dennis Rodman is not a great person per se. Like, I won't get into all of it right now, but the point is like there's a guy in North Korea who wants to be his best friend, right? That's a fact. And he doesn't want to be anyone else's friend here. At a certain point, you're like, well, it's because he believes he's being honest. And like Dennis Rodman is, despite however else he might be, he is honestly a weird guy. He's not putting on an act.
Right. He is authentically weird.
He is authentically strange, right? And you can like him, you can dislike him. When he tells you something, you can believe he means what he's saying. It could still be wrong. He could still be wrong. He could even be lying, but in his brain, he's not lying. He thinks he's telling you the truth. And so that's important. Like Larry David is another one of these examples that I like to share because like Larry David is probably the most obnoxious person, in his show, right? Like in real life, he seems fine, but like in his show, he's like kind of an obnoxious guy, but it's because he tells you what's on his mind. He tells you the things that most people keep to themselves and they think in their head. So when he says something, he means what he says, right?
Or Steve Ballmer, former CEO of Microsoft. He ran sales, and I think can't remember if he was actually CEO, but he ran sales for a while, and he was a screamer.
Yeah.
Right? But he was completely authentic. What you got is who he is.
Right. But I think that builds trust, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like, someone tells you, well, I think the risk is low. And you're like, okay, well, it's about how much stock can I put in what they're actually, do they believe in what they're saying? It's like if you go to a restaurant and you go to a steakhouse and you're like, hey, what should I get on the menu? And the waiter says, honestly, the kids' chicken fingers are like the best in the world. I know it's crazy and they're only $15, but you should get those. Like, you're probably going to be like, okay, well, that's an interesting one. I thought I was going to get a steak. But then when he comes and tries to sell you like the nice bottle of wine afterwards, you're probably going to be like, well, he probably also has a strong opinion about the expensive bottle of wine, right? Because he just sold me cheap chicken fingers. I'm not saying that that's, whatever. You get the idea. But that's kind of the thought process is how much stock can I put in what someone's actually telling me?
So as someone running sales, how do you engender authenticity with your team?
I love that question. There's this expression that you lead from the front, right? We've probably all seen that image of the guy who is like telling people to push the rock, like the leader. And then there's like the leader who like pushes the rock. Like I try to be the one who helps to push the rock with the team, but I also try to be an authentic leader. I try to lean into being an honest version of who I am. And I try to lead with honesty and transparency and not putting on a facade about what's going on. We had an onsite back in June in which I asked, before we did anything, we did a session on understanding your why. And I talked about the importance of understanding your why. And then it got into this kind of emotional, I cried during this first time I'd met many of these people in person. My grandmother had just passed away and, I just had a daughter, almost a couple of years ago. And long story short, there was this moment that we had with my daughter and my grandmother and 4 generations in one photo, like right before she passed away. Probably the last meaningful memory I had with her. I'm even getting a little emotional talking about it now, but I shared this with my team as a means of helping them understand how much becoming a father meant to me and how it became so important in my life. And having that level of vulnerability with the team to explain to them, listen, like my job is to, kind of lead you in this endeavor we're in together, but like there's more to this job. Like we're all doing this because of something that's outside of work. I'm going to tell you what it is for me. I want to know what it is for you. That allows everyone to take a deep breath because they're like, you know what, this guy, I think what they would say is this guy gets it. He knows that like, this is just a job, right? Like we are all people and that he's willing to go first, kind of cry and tell us about his personal life. That's how I try to, lead with authenticity and like invite people to be authentic too, because I'm willing to do it. What about you? Tell me, like, how have you come across this, in your own work? Like, how do you try to do this with your clients? Have you come across people that are particularly good in this area? Have you come across people that needed work? Obviously, we won't name names, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So as a coach, I go pretty deep with my clients. I don't call myself a sales coach. I call myself a performance mindset coach, right? I work with people so that like their mind is 100% focused on what they want to accomplish and they can avoid the head trash that gets in the way of most of us. So I go pretty deep, right? Someone says, hey, this is an issue I've been facing ever since I was 5 years old, right? It's not something that, hey, last week I got into a fender bender. Those aren't the kinds of issues that get in the way of people being who they really are. And I find that I naturally share in return. One, I'm an oversharer for starters.
That's okay. I think that can be, like I said, I think that can be a really good thing because it makes people feel comfortable.
Yeah. And, I've seen at least one of my clients cry when I tell them about when I lost my dog. And, there's a bond that gets created between people where you're that open and that vulnerable. When I'm that open and that vulnerable, and my clients are my friends.
Right.
I've invited clients to come and stay the weekend, bring their family. And my wife goes, you can't do that. You have to create a separation between you and your clients. It's like, I'm not a therapist. I mean, I play one on TV, but I'm not a therapist. I'm their coach. I'm 100%, in their camp. I'm carrying the water for them if they need. I used to tell my Oracle salespeople when I was running sales enablement at Oracle, whatever you need. Like if you're going out on a call and your car needs to be washed, give me your keys, whatever, right? So no boundaries for me on that. Whatever it takes for success. And for me, success is not selling the thing. It's better patient outcomes at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, where one of my coaching clients calls on. It's real-time statistics with a well-known media organization that doesn't have real-time statistics now and wants to have instantaneous real-time statistics on display in Monday Night Football. And so I help drive to those goals, and those are big goals, right? And I don't care so much about instant statistics on football, but patient outcomes is something that you and I probably both care about.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, first of all, I think it's great that you are vulnerable with your clients. And you said something earlier that I agree with, which is that you can't care about just selling the thing. And I think the best seller, I mean, look, what I'm about to say is everyone's going to say, duh, but the best sellers really care about their client. They really want the person to succeed. They're naturally empathetic, and they kind of, for me, I kind of wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm a people pleaser. I want other people to win. And so you kind of have to be that way if you are, to your point, like you'd want to do things with your clients, be friends with them, right? To me, that seems normal. You should want to do that. If you're somebody who's really good at sales, you should enjoy their success. You should enjoy spending time with them. Not always. I mean, you can have customers that you don't necessarily like as people or that you just don't get along with in that way, but you should want them to win, right? So I think that that's something that I admire about what you're doing, and I think it resonates with me as well.
Jeff, there are exceptions. I worked with a guy who started in inside sales. I won't mention his name, but he knows who he is. I won't mention any names. He started in inside sales at Oracle, and he would constantly be asking me, hey, can we do some more role playing? He was a driven guy. And we would sit back to back, and he'd call me, and I go, hello, right? So he moved into field sales at Oracle, and then he moved to being a manager and a regional manager, and now he's a GVP at another company. He was not that empathetic person. He had a process, and he was a ball breaker, right? He was a grinder in a good way, and he made shit happen. He did it to notch the wins. But I think the people that play in that style and are successful are the exceptions. We see a lot of grinders who just grind and never get anywhere. It's the people who are truly authentic, who actually align themselves with their customers, who get on the same side of the table with their customers and help them understand what winning looks like and help them win. Personally, I see many more of those being successful. And by the way, those are the ones I want to align with. Those are the ones I want to help.
I agree. Yeah. And I think now more than ever that is starting to be the case. Well, I think it's always been the case, but I think people are starting to realize that because with the world of AI, I mean, AI can start to tell you what to say and do and, whatever. And so my whole thesis is that becomes commoditized. If that's happening all the time, then everyone says and does all the same things all the time. Right. And so how you really stand out is by leaning into, again, like we said, honest version of yourself, having a real relationship with that person. AI doesn't have a soul. AI doesn't have shared experience. It can't say, hey, you and I went to the same school and let's talk about the cool things we did at the school together, whatever. Like it just can't do that. It can tell you like some language that you can use that's going to optimize your chances of winning. But when you hear the word like synergies or whatever a million times from AI, I mean, I know people are actually using AI to not use that word, but you get the idea. Like it, when people start to hear the same synonym of synergies all the time, they're like, oh, okay, well, like everyone's using the same thing. So yeah, I think that's 100% the case more than ever today.
It's like saying the long M dash, right? Everyone knows that's AI written, right? So now the latest rule is, hey, ChatGPT, don't use long M dashes when you write for me. So there's two things that I'm thinking of. So just because we can use technology to prep doesn't mean that we should or shouldn't. We still have to be able to think on our feet. So I use this example. I'm going to visit the VP of marketing, at Acme Manufacturing Company. They make anvils. And I'm going up to the third floor because that's where the VP is. And I'm all set to see her and have a conversation with her. And I get on the elevator, I press 3, and the CEO walks in and presses 14. I don't have time to pull out my phone and place a query. What should I say to the CEO of Acme Manufacturing? I just have to wing it. And I have to be ready to wing it. I have to be ready to start an improvised conversation that's useful to that person. So anyone that's in field sales can have that experience. And similarly, I got a call like 3 months ago from an SDR at emerging tech company. And Shay said to me, I'm calling to talk with you about how you manage security at your company. And I said, tell me more. Tell me about my company. And he followed me down that conversation because he was prepared. He wasn't prepared because someone gave him a script. He was prepared because he had studied my company. Now, the funny thing was his data was wrong. It wasn't my company. It was a different company. But I said, Shay, good news and bad news. The good news is you did a fabulous job. You took the pivot. You were ready. You were prepared. You were able to pivot. You did a good job. The bad news is bad data. Not your fault, bad data. And Shay and I have been coaching every 2 weeks ever since.
That's amazing. I love that.
Because I saw a spark in him. He wasn't counting on a pre-written script.
But what I love about that example that you just shared is that that just goes to show how people really just genuinely connect with people that they think are making an honest effort. Like it's the honesty behind it, right? Like someone can go out of their way. Like in my book, I wrote about like one of the best cold emails I ever got. I'm a diehard Boston Bruins fan. This girl, she actually worked at Gong at the time, had written me this email. It's about David Pasternak, who's the best player on the team, and how I could turn my team into a bunch of David Pasternaks. It was like, coaching them with Gong or whatever. And like, the thing is, I did not need at that time, and I like Gong and like I use it. I did not need it at that time. I knew I didn't need it, but her email was so good. And the fact that she had done this level of that was the singular reason I was like, I want to reward you. I'm going to spend the time to figure out if there's something I'm missing about why I should be buying your product. And so to your point, it's like, he didn't even get the right company, but it's not because he was lazy. It was because he just had bad data. Like, he was earnest in his effort. And that just goes to show you, and I don't know if it's a reflection on how poorly everyone else is doing their outreach, because maybe it is. Maybe we're so used to just dishonesty all the time or kind of cheesy, tackiness or whatever, that it stands out when someone's earnest. But there is a way to be earnest that's not automated. And to your point, I got an email the other day where it said, hey, first name. And then the person actually had the balls to like follow up and be like, hey, did you get my first email? And I almost wanted to be like, I did, but like I didn't reply.
Would you read it back to me, please?
Yeah. And then I remember I got one, someone said like something about my book, but I knew it was AI. And I said like, what was your favorite chapter? And then it said like, oh, I just liked how it talked about authenticity, or like, it was like, okay, well, clearly like you didn't read the book. And like the irony there is like, that's actually damaging to the brand, because now I think that those people are like kind of scummy. Right? Because they tried to trick me, basically, right? They tried to pretend that they did something, that they lied, right? So I think to your point, it's like just the earnestness, the honesty is something that stands out.
So there's two pieces to it, Jeff. The first is that earnestness, the curiosity, right? And I rewarded Shay by texting him back saying, anytime you want to coach, I'm happy to spend time with you. No strings attached, no cost, right? And we talk every 2 weeks now. And I have fun with it because he's an up and comer. And I think about the other side of it, where in this industry, we just don't do enough deliberate practice. And I was running a power hour years ago, and we had 8 reps in the room, and one of the inside sales reps got a prospect on the phone. And he said to her, I'd like to chat with you about the project you're involved with. I have some thoughts on how you can ensure success. And she rewarded him. She said, good for you for doing the research to find that I was involved in that project. You probably saw that on my LinkedIn profile, right? He goes, yeah. She goes, well, I've moved on to another project. And he said, okay, thanks, goodbye. Because he hadn't had the deliberate practice of the pivot. I mean, he was just so happy to have her on the phone, but when she went off script, he was gone. And there were 2 obvious questions there. One was, what are you doing now? And who's doing the other project, right?
Right, yeah.
And he missed both because he hadn't had the deliberate practice.
That, but also I would say another thing that's missing was the non-attachment to the outcome.
Ah, yes, I love that.
The moment that he felt that there was not a dollar sign above this person's head anymore, he felt that the relationship was not worth building. And I think that's a major oversight. This was someone who was previously just involved in the project that directly impacts you, and you should care about wanting to build a relationship with them. You never know where it's going to go. I mean, some of the people that have been my best customers are people that were actually not in roles to make the decision, but very much helped me influence it or gave me the inside baseball that I needed. And if I had been dismissive of them, and frankly, if all I cared about was their value to me, then that never would have happened. And there's people that I stay in touch with that, so I think it's the non-attachment to the outcome, not viewing it as like, hey, I'm going to get a sale or I'm not going to get a sale, and it's not worth it if I don't.
You're exactly right. And the crazy thing was with this guy, there was no visible outcome there before he picked up the phone, right? There were no dollars attached. He had no right to expect a positive outcome by talking to her. And then he blew it.
Yeah.
So speaking about attachment to outcomes or lack thereof, I was helping a rep prep for a call with two senior people at an insurance company. And she happened to notice that both of them had been with the company for more than 20 years. So she opened the meeting. It was an in-person meeting at the company headquarters with the simple question, how come the two of you have been with this company so long? What keeps you here?
Yeah.
20 minutes later, they picked up the agenda. And as a result of that question, she then got an introduction by one of them to the chief digital officer at the company.
Yeah. I remember when you and I were just like chatting, like a week or two ago, we had talked about this. I love that. Just the natural curiosity and again, non-attachment to the outcome, I think, in that scenario, right? Because didn't come in with the agenda to just try to figure out how to get the next step. It was just a genuine curiosity. Totally fine if that took up the entire call and she didn't get anywhere. But in this case, it ended up working out for her. And, this will sound a little bit Buddhist or whatever, but I do think to some degree what's meant to be will be. Right? If it's meant to be, it'll be, if you try to force something to be, that it's, it's really, that's not going to change the outcome.
In a handful of disciplines, car racing is one. I think downhill skiing or mogul skiing is another. To go fast, you have to go slow. But to go fast, you have to go slow. The faster you try to go on a racetrack, the quicker you crash. You actually have to take your time through the turns, and that results in you going faster. Same thing with relationship building, professional relationship building. Because if you try to rush the relationship, if you try to get to what a salesperson might call the meat of, okay, let's talk about the deal. I mean, look, in Japanese culture, you have a 3-hour business meeting and business is talked about in the last 10 minutes.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's very different. Yeah, that's actually interesting because it's so different than, you and I live in the Boston area. And so I think the stereotype is maybe that we're not as kind, at least compared to other parts of the country. But yeah, people just get down to brass tacks. It's all about what can you do for me? It's very interesting, just the cultural dynamics and differences.
I've coached people all around the world and, the center of the universe, Manhattan, it's, okay, what are we going to do right now? Let's go. And in the Midwest, it's, you have to ask about the weather.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was just in Idaho and it's just a very different, my coworker and I were just remarking to ourselves, like, oh, well, people are much nicer here. He's from New Jersey, I'm from Boston. It's just very different, right? And so I guess, yeah, maybe it's be less like Boston and more like Idaho is probably, or more like Japan maybe is what it should be.
The rule in Boulder, Colorado is you don't ask what you do, you ask what do you do for fun?
Right. Yeah, I like that because that speaks to really getting to know a person and who they are.
Yeah. So, Jeff, this has been a fascinating conversation and a couple of key takeaways. One, be a freaking human being. I think that's a good lead, right?
Yep, I think so. I think it's important.
I hesitate to ask the question, do we teach that in sales school?
I think, it's funny. I was talking with a guy who's writing a book about Gen Z and all the stuff they're going through with social media and how they judge each other by their Instagrams and TikToks and the mental health toll it's taking. I think it's more of a cultural thing. I don't think it's even in sales school. I think we need to help younger people, not to get on my little pedestal right now, but I think that we just need to help people value themselves a little bit more when they're younger and not to judge through screens. And we need to build up kids, I think. I know it's very different than where you were going. I mean, do we need to teach it in sales school? Yeah, I do. I think it's important that we teach people the value of authenticity. I also think culturally there's things we can do to make it so people are more comfortable just being themselves, So I think the answer is yes.
You bring up the issue of screens and, I don't want to be the old man, yelling, get off my lawn, put down your screen. But I see so many people, a young couple sitting at a table both of them with their noses in their browsers, on their phones. And it's like, for God's sakes, talk to each other.
Yeah, they're not even truly experiencing one another.
Here's an example of a great manager. Jim McKeegan and I worked together at a tech company a few years ago, and he ran the services organization. And every Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, he would kick off his weekly call with his team. And it was a broad team that was worldwide. He would go, Charlie, how's that MBA going? And he'd listen and he'd go, great. Sounds like this course is more interesting than the last one you took. Sally, how's your daughter? Right? He would touch a half a dozen people on his team, showing listening and empathy, right? Because he would remember their answers from one week to the next. And so he wasn't teaching. He was setting an example. He was showing people what good looked like. And maybe that's what we have to do. Maybe that's what we are doing, is just showing people what good looks like and hoping, and I don't use that word very often, but hoping that some people will magnify their own activities or be converted.
I like that. It's funny. Our CEO did something like that this morning on a call, and I admired what he was doing, checking in with certain people. And I think leadership, doing it from the top, leading from the front, I think that's a really good recommendation for how we can build this more in sales.
With people like us driving sales success, we've got a shot.
I hope so, Lee. Yeah, no, I think I like to hope so. I think, all the stuff that's going on is moving people. It's actually ironic. It's going to take some time, but I actually think it's moving people in this direction because they don't want to get automated out, and they're realizing, if I just be more about me, I can stand out. So I think we're moving that way in a weird way, but yes.
Jeff, if people want to be in touch with you or learn more about Zorro, where can they find you?
Yeah, online. I've got a website, jeffkirchick.com, LinkedIn, books on Amazon. Reach out. Happy to connect. And I appreciate you having me here, Lee.
Thank you. We'll see you again at an upcoming Pavilion event.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.
Another deep dive into the topic of sales excellence and the performance mindset. If you found this conversation interesting, I would appreciate it if you would share the podcast with a coworker or two. And to explore this topic in more depth, send me a note via the contact form on podcast.thoughtsonselling.com or find some time for us to talk at meet.acellergroup.com. Thanks.